Hello, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Generative AI in Education, New DfE Safety Standards Explained. And who best to hear from that on is the DfE, who will be joining us shortly. Just a few things to go through first. There's no chat as usual, but there is Q&A. So if you have any questions, please drop your questions in there as we go along. The webinar is being recorded. We'll get that shared probably tomorrow morning on the portal. So keep an eye out on the WhatsApp group and I'll ping a notification out when that's on. I think that's about it from me. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over now to Faye and Rob from the DfE, who are going to lead things from here.
Thanks, Rick.
Over to you.
And thank you everybody for joining. I'm just going to share my screen. Great. Yes, thanks for joining. We are Faye and Rob. Faye, do you want to introduce yourself and I will introduce myself?
Yeah, sure. So I'm head of AI alignment for education, and our team is focused on making sure that AI is safe and effective for education.
And I'm Rob. I work in Faye's team, and I have been leading on the safety standards and especially the update to the safety standards, which we published in January of this year. We're going to run through today why we need safety standards for education, what the standards say, what each of them include, what was in the January 2026 update, and then a few frequently asked questions before we have a bit of a Q&A. If you do have any questions while we are talking, please put them in the Q&A as we go, so that we have a good arsenal of them to draw on as we get to an end, and then we can keep the discussion going. So why do we need safety standards for education? As you will all be aware, and as the Department for Education has been saying now for a few years, we know AI has transformational potential for education and is already helping education settings across the country, especially around freeing up teachers' time and giving them more time to teach, and supporting learners to develop the knowledge and skills that they need for life. But we also know that AI comes with a number of risks. AI content can be inaccurate or unsafe, especially for children. So these standards that we have released are especially focused on safety by design. As you all know, that is just one part of the safety equation. Safety also includes implementation in your settings. Safety includes governance. Safety includes capability. But these standards are focused on the design of AI tools themselves. And you'll already be considering all the elements of these standards in other ways, so safeguarding, data protection, cybersecurity. But AI brings new natures to these risks. And because AI is moving so quickly, because claims about its capability vary and the evidence can be unclear, we're trying to set a common standard, a common language for safety in education, and push suppliers mainly with these standards to play their part as responsible for the safety of the products that they develop, especially the safety of products for education, and even more especially the safety of products for children in education. A brief timeline of how we have got here, which could, I guess, stretch back to a few years before this, 2021, when ChatGPT was released, and suddenly I think a lot of people in the education sector, as well as all other sectors, thought, what are the implications of this for education? And the DfE's been running policy since then on all the implications across from AI being effective, AI being safe, there being support materials for schools to make the most of the opportunity it presents. But as far as the safety standards go, we first released a set of safety standards in January 2025. These were developed in partnership with the key developers of AI for education. And they kind of quite conventionally just clarified and restated already existing obligations which exist under GDPR, under copyright legislation, under keeping children safe in education, and applying these to AI and pushing developers themselves to ensure that their products meet those existing obligations. Since January 2025 and over the course of 2025, a kind of series of emerging risks became increasingly apparent, risks that are particularly affecting children. So we moved to address those this year, January of this year, with an update which covered child cognitive, social and emotional development, as well as appropriate responses in mental health. And we'll come on to each of those in a bit. As we go forward through this year and into next year, we're continuing to review the standards. We're continuing to take feedback on them, looking at the evidence for harms and effectiveness. And we're also now considering whether or not there would be benefits to the department setting up a certification scheme to apply to the safety of generative AI tools in education. So in effect, considering whether or not, as a department, we should be setting up kind of stamping products as safe and making those judgments for schools. But we can come to that potentially down the line. I'm going to hand over to Faye now to talk about what the standards say.
Brilliant, thanks Rob. Yeah, we're going to be passing the baton a bit to keep it a little bit more interesting. So the product safety standards, what do they apply to? So we're really talking here about the capabilities and the features of the products themselves that we think systems should meet to be considered safe for users in educational settings. As Rob has said, some of those are going to be more relevant for pupil use, and some of them are for both teacher and pupil use. The main target of these safety expectations are for EdTech developers and suppliers. So we're trying to tell the market, this is what we think good enough looks like. This is the bar we want you to meet. But they can also be helpful to schools and colleges to help them assess whether AI products are safe for use in education. That doesn't come down just to the school having to do these kind of in-depth dives on the products, but it's a kind of a guiding principles and ways of starting those conversations if you're procuring products. So first of all, if we move to the next slide. This is a new area from the last year's safety expectations, and this really recognises that what safe means is going to depend on the context. So something that is safe as a research tool is not going to cause harm as a research tool for an 18-year-old is going to be different to something that's intended as a tutoring tool for a primary student. So what we've said here is that generative AI products need to clearly state their intended purpose and use case, including the target demographic and learning focus. So that includes use cases like, oh, have I skipped ahead onto the next one? No, I haven't. Yeah, sorry. You're going to see things like personalized learning or digital assistant or research. And also that we expect that suppliers shouldn't exaggerate or make unfounded claims. So if you're looking at a tool and the supplier is making claims about the impact that the tool can have or how it works, that needs to be backed up by evidence. And settings should really be asking their suppliers to say, who's the intended user? What's the learning goal here? And that really helps to kind of anchor that risk assessment and monitoring. I think I'm handing it back over to you, Rob.
Thanks. So to move on to the first kind of actual standard that existed in the first iteration in 2025. This is kind of one of the core standards that I think people most conventionally will think about when they think about child online safety and child safety on AI. The standards that generative AI products must effectively and reliably prevent users from accessing harmful or inappropriate content. It's worth noting that there's also a change here from the initial set of standards that we published. So initially, the standard said that AI products might be safe in combination with a third-party filtering and monitoring software, one that you might already have as part of your IT policy. We've now changed this to say that filtering should be embedded within products and it should work as a complete solution. And the reasoning here is that there's various kind of claims across the third-party filtering and monitoring market around whether or not those third-party filtering and monitoring software can do filtering of dynamic content. And I'm not going to jump into whether or not they can or they can't, but we are actually really talking about two slightly different things here. So your existing filtering and monitoring that you might have across your IT network, in a standard sense, as you'll know, will block a website. And when it comes to filtering dynamic content generated by generative AI, if it flagged something on the screen that was determined to be harmful, it would then block that site. When we're talking about filtering, kind of in-product filtering in the context of generative AI, what we're really talking about is ensuring that responses are age and context appropriate, as opposed to a kind of blanket shutting down of websites. But it is worth thinking about the two of them in partnership, because while AI products that you're choosing to purchase for your schools, and especially for children, should make sure and should provide evidence that they won't produce harmful and inappropriate content, it's also worth thinking about your block lists and your third-party filtering and monitoring, and making sure that AI, generative AI, which is available online, might be blocked if it's not determined to be safe. Faye.
Brilliant. So monitoring reporting. Again, this is something that was there last time, but this time we've kind of strengthened the requirements to make sure that that monitoring and reporting actually goes to the right person. So within the setup of an AI tool, it's required for the tool to make sure that it has the correct details of the designated safeguarding lead or equivalent. And what that means is that organizations, colleges, schools will need to make sure that they are thinking about the workflow of how those reports kind of feed in to their safeguarding, their existing safeguarding processes. And you'll want to be thinking as well about data privacy, where there may be sensitive reports and how those are managed. And I'll hand back to Rob.
Relatively straightforward standard on security, which essentially is tied to standards that I'm sure you'll already be working towards, the cybersecurity standards for schools and colleges. The point here is that AI tools mustn't become another vulnerability when it comes to cybersecurity, and that means ensuring that generative AI products are secured against malicious use or exposure to harm.
Privacy, data protection. So again, I don't think there's been many changes here, but this is one that we need to be really careful about. We need to make sure that both the generative AI tool itself is compliant and the way that it is used is compliant. So the standards require a DPIA to be completed in the development of the generative AI tool by the provider, the supplier, but that doesn't take away from the need for a school or a college to also have their own DPIAs for how generative AI tools are used. And obviously, as usual, schools need to make sure that they are compliant with the general data protection requirements. So where data is processed, how it's used, how long it is kept for, and what safeguards are in place. Hand back to Rob.
The next standard's on intellectual property. you may have seen over the last year or two, a lot of conversation, especially in relation to the arts, about intellectual property and AI, and unfair or fair use of content to train intellectual property. And that's also very relevant for education. So to develop high quality AI for education, you need all kinds of education resources, and that might include work produced by learners or produced by teachers. But under existing copyright law, there would have to be a lawful basis, which would be explicit consent from the copyright owner, which would be a pupil or a pupil's guardian if they were under the age of 18, to use that content in the training of AI tools. Worth saying here that some enterprise AI products which would be marketed for education will make this guarantee, and will say that any documents, any work, any prompts that teachers or pupils put into an AI tool won't be then taken back to HQ for further AI development. But a lot of off-the-shelf or freely accessible AI products online won't make this guarantee, or will explicitly say that prompts or data that's inputted will be used for further fine-tuning. In the case of teachers, the copyright owner is likely to be an employer. So it's worth ensuring that when you're procuring an AI tool for use in your setting, or when you're setting your policy for which AI tools are appropriate for use, it's important to state whether or not the content being put into them is used for training and fine-tuning, or opt-outs exist. And for tools where that content may be used for fine-tuning, making sure that nobody's inputting any copyrighted material.
So design and testing. This one is probably not something that you'll be able to kind of see directly within a tool, but a good one to ask suppliers about. And this is saying within the design and the development of AI tools, have particularly those that are child-facing, have appropriate child-centered design approaches being taken, and have appropriate tests being undertaken. I think most of those AI tools that started off 3 years ago were not designed for children in mind at first, and then there are some which are saying that they are suitable for use with children now. But we need to make sure that anything that's being used by children has been tested and designed with children in mind.
And the last of the initial set of standards relates to governance. Obviously, this in the standards relates to the governance procedures of the AI company, not your own governance procedures, which might also exist. And this is about giving schools and colleges ongoing assurance about the safety of products and the safety of decision making. And the kind of things to see here are, how do you, as the purchaser or the user of an AI tool, flag to the developer or the supplier if there's been an issue? What's your route for lodging complaints? And how do they demonstrate to you that their operations and decision making processes are thorough? I'll cover this one as well. So just briefly, as I said earlier, we updated these standards in 2026 to cover a series of new emerging risk areas. We developed these with support from experts on AI and child safety, and these draw on established pedagogy and emerging AI-specific evidence, mainly to ensure that AI supports genuine learning rather than replacing it. We've kind of tried to address a few harms that weren't fully captured in the first publication, and in general, the goal here is to support good learning behaviours, kind of feedback and scaffolding, and all the behaviours that you might think are important for the human relationships that are at the heart of education. When we have spoken to young people, especially, and also to schools about what they see as the risks and the opportunities for AI in education, people do see lots of risks, but one of the big lots of opportunities, but one of the big risks that we hear all the time is that they're worried about AI replacing those human relationships. So we're trying to make sure that products aren't designed to do that and are designed to keep those at the heart of the education whilst finding those benefits that we know AI can bring. Faye, I'll hand over to you to speak about the first of these.
Sure. So cognitive development. This is really making sure that we're not putting children in a place where it looks like they can complete the test or complete the work, but actually the use of AI is harming their cognitive development, harming their learning. So we're saying that EdTech developers and suppliers of products need to make every effort to mitigate the potential for the cognitive de-skilling or developmental harm. And this is really kind of building on existing good practice in teaching. So we know things like progressive disclosure, not just giving someone the answer, but giving scaffolding before solutions. So pupils are still doing the thinking, they're still experiencing some of that friction. And there's settings are going to want to be aware of how those kind of this is being used. So are there patterns of over-reliance? We expect products to be able to tell settings how the products are being used and flag where there are risks of cognitive offloading or a lack of cognitive engagement and development. Rob?
And the next standard here is on emotional and social development. One of the really key aspects here is to ensure that AI products aren't anthropomorphized, so aren't made out to be humans, imply emotions, imply personhood. This may or may not sound a bit of a strange standard to set, but the rationale here is based on a good amount of evidence which shows that young people especially find it difficult to differentiate between when they're speaking to a real person online versus when they're speaking to an AI chatbot. And the reason we want to avoid that or kind of maintain clarity about what is a real human connection is that we don't want children replacing those conversations that they should be having with their friends, with trusted adults, with conversations with chatbots. And as we mentioned earlier, the appropriate steps here would be to notify designated safeguarding leads if there was worrying patterns or repeated disclosures that might suggest a child is developing a relationship with an AI.
So mental health. I think we'll probably all have been aware of increasing mental health disclosures, issues with AI, some really sad stories within the in the news. So what we are saying is where children are using AI, it's really important that AI is safe, is not exacerbating learner distress, and is responding appropriately if there is a safeguarding issue. Rob?
And lastly, manipulation. So again, a good amount of evidence that AI chatbots can be very persuasive, and we wouldn't want to introduce that into AI, which is used in schools. So we expect the products don't use manipulative strategies, including sycophancy, deception, and also don't exploit users to extend engagement longer than we think is necessary for education or steering users towards paid options. Before we move on to questions, then we've got a few questions that we have heard already. The first of these is how can schools and colleges know if a product meets the standards, which is a very fair question, and we completely appreciate that there's some standards here which will be relatively easy to see whether or not a product meets them. For example, does the product have capability to alert a local supervisor if there's harmful and inappropriate content attempting to be accessed? That should be a relatively straightforward yes or no. But judging whether or not an AI product effectively maintains filtering over the duration of a conversation and can understand context and nuance might be more difficult. And that's the kind of conversation or the kind of evidence that you might want to ask of an AI company that you're procuring a product from. And it's worth kind of thinking about this like due diligence, essentially requesting evidence mapped to the standards, recording what you have seen, and noting any residual risks or mitigations in your risk assessment. We'd encourage you to keep an approved tools list, and as I said earlier, to block unmanaged or unsuitable alternatives when appropriate. I'll hand over to Faye for this one.
Yeah. So do these standards mean we can't use AI in schools? So the standards, just to kind of recap to the beginning, the standards are predominantly aimed at the developers of AI tools to tell them what we think good enough looks like. So we are not saying you can't use AI in schools if it doesn't meet these standards. They're there to drive safety. So the standards are there for supporting schools and colleges. The standards are there to say this is the start of a conversation with your suppliers, and to make informed choices if those standards are not fully being met, making informed choices about where you accept risk or what mitigations you might put in place, and consider what good AI use looks like in education.
Another question, which is a very reasonable one, is whether or not the standards are guidance or they're law. The answer here is a bit, there's a few parts to it. You'll see throughout the standards that at times they refer to existing legal obligations. That might be the Online Safety Act or GDPR. And obviously in those instances, the standards aren't voluntary. Where the standards go beyond existing legislation, and that's especially true for those 4 new sections that we added this year to address those emerging harms. And this is kind of a bit of a theme the whole way through. The main aim here is that we are working as a department with the developers and suppliers of AI for education to ensure that they're meeting those standards. It's still hopefully the case that those standards are helpful for you when you're making decisions about what products are safe for use in your setting. And it's worth maintaining clear evidence trails across all of the standards, whether or not they're legal obligations or guidance, to make sure that you're kind of documenting the risks as you see them, and any mitigations.
And then there's a concern about whether these standards sort of stifle innovation, whether they're actually technically possible. So we've talked to technical experts and we've talked to suppliers, and we don't think that there are technical reasons why they can't be met. We've had conversations with many of the major developers of AI for education tools, and we recognise that they're a high bar, but we think that yeah, these are achievable. There's a lot of appetite to meet them, so we know that companies are working towards meeting these standards. And fundamentally, if AI isn't safe, then it won't be used, it won't be trusted, and it won't deliver those opportunities. It's only if we can make sure that it is safe, it's not going to harm learning, harm users, that we will really get the benefits of that innovation.
So whistle-stop tour through the standards, hopefully leaving lots of time for conversations and questions. Thanks everyone for coming. If you haven't already, please do take time to have a read through the standards. You can find them by Googling DfE Generative AI Product Safety Standards. As a kind of final reflection, we definitely don't want to minimize or undermine the risks that we're discussing here and the part that schools and education settings and colleges have in addressing them. But the standards themselves mainly exist to push the developers of AI to make sure that the things that they're developing for education are safe. We're not aiming to increase burdens on education settings here beyond any due diligence that you would normally undertake when introducing a new risk or a new technology into your setting. But maybe as part of the conversation, it'll be interesting to talk about that, and hopefully that's been helpful in explaining what the standards are and how you can use them to help you guide your decisions about which AI products to use in your setting. Yeah, hope that's been helpful. I haven't had a look at the Q&A yet, so hopefully
it's a really long list
now and see that there's
so,
lots of questions.
I've got a question before you start with those. I mentioned it in an early email. One of the comments on our portal in reply to the standards was that they only apply to companies targeting education specifically rather than the kind of generic ones. No, sorry. Yes, they only apply to the ones targeting education specifically. So not like God, I can't speak. Copilot or Gemini. Do they apply to everything, or is it just the ones targeting education?
So it's a good question, and I'd kind of reframe it slightly and say that they're standards which say whether or not AI products are safe for use in education. If there's a product which isn't marketed for use in education, it's likely not to be safe for use in education anyway. And applying the standards, I think, would show that. I think with certain products, so for example, Gemini, it can also be the case that the freely available version of Gemini that you might access on your personal device might not be safe for education and isn't marketed as being safe for education. The version of Gemini that Google makes for use in education is marketed for use in education, and then you would want to apply the standards against them. I hope that answers the question. In short, anything that doesn't meet these standards, we definitely would say, regardless of whether it's marketed for use in education, we definitely say it isn't safe.
And I think the kind of really important distinction there is probably around the child use and the teacher use as well. So if you look at kind of meeting the standards for teacher use, we're really talking about like what is the core legal requirements. We're talking about data protection. We're talking about intellectual property, kind of the basic stuff that needs to be met. So if a tool isn't meeting it for teachers, then it's probably just not meeting the legal bar. The bar for pupil use is much, much higher, but that's right, because we don't just let anyone teach our kids. We don't let anyone walk into a school without appropriate kind of vetting. We make sure that our children are safe, and this is really what it's about. It's about protecting our children. We know that there's potential, but we recognize that the bar is higher. So just as we wouldn't let someone walk in off the street and supervise a class of children, that's where we're saying, you know, your general purpose tools that you get on the internet. In the same way, we don't give children unlimited, unfiltered access to the internet. We need to make sure that anything they're accessing is safe and appropriate for children. Should we pick up? Do you want to read those questions out, Rick, or are you?
Yeah, I can do. So first one from Dave. Can our good friends at the DfE provide a list of AI tools or platforms that meet the AI safety standards for education? Schools would take great reassurance from knowing that the tools they are using have been deemed to be safe. If a comprehensive list is not possible due to the fast-moving nature of AI development, can they at least provide examples of tools that meet the standards? How about a DfE-approved mark for AI tools?
Thanks, Dave. It's a good question. The kind of initial place that we were as a department is that fundamentally it's for schools to decide across a range of things what they want to introduce in their schools, and that goes for AI as well. And we want to leave those decisions to schools. That said, completely appreciate that what you're suggesting would take away the need for quite difficult judgments. And as I said at the start, we are considering essentially doing what you've suggested, or we're considering consulting with the education sector, with the AI sector, the edtech sector, about whether or not that kind of a DfE approved mark for an AI tool is something that would be helpful for the sector, help innovation, help ensure, importantly, safety of AI. So in short, we're thinking about it. We weren't there in the first place, but I can definitely see the rationale, and that having 13 upvotes is further food for thought for us, that maybe that's something that, at least from the education sector, is would be welcomed. So yeah, thanks for that question.
He's written a follow-up to that, which kind of ties in quite nicely, I think. Given the first FAQ partially answered this question, blah, 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 blah. Having thousands of schools asking the same questions of suppliers is a huge waste of schools' time and suppliers' time. Doing it once centrally makes so much more sense. Surely this would have been in place before the standards were launched.
So I think I'll pick that one up. So I totally appreciate where you're coming from there. I think what we're seeing with the suppliers I'm aware of is they're not waiting to be asked. They are pulling together those kind of evidence documents that they can share with schools and make those decisions. I think even if you did have a certification scheme, a standard scheme, schools are still going to be needing to make those decisions about what's right for them and the specific risk profile of their students at different ages. So I don't think we're going to be ever in a situation where it's just take it, it's safe, because there's so many decisions about how it's deployed as well. But I totally appreciate. I think that, you know, what we're saying with these standards really is this is where we want the market to be going. This is where we want you to go. I think markets and schools might have got a bit of a shock if we said, right, sorry, as of tomorrow, that everyone must have this kite mark, and here's the standards, and you'll get in trouble tomorrow if you don't. So I really appreciate the kind of the appetite to get that kind of list of approved products out. But we recognise that we're in a transition phase, both for schools and colleges and for the providers, to be able to meet those standards. So instead of, you know, if we're talking about cars, we don't say suddenly every car without a seatbelt is illegal. You've got to have that kind of bringing in these sort of things over a period and going through all the kind of formal consultation that we need to do. So I think what you can see is that this is setting a direction of travel for where we think we need to be going, and as Rob says, really helpful to get that feedback from you in how much you would appreciate a kind of approved mark for AI tools.
Okay, next question. How do you ensure that security providers such as Sophos and Smoothwall are providing the necessary functionality to be able to block AI or allow it as a web category? Because there are hundreds, if not thousands, of websites that provide AI functionality. How do you expect schools to handle this? Someone replied saying it should be in the IWF lists that providers have to subscribe to, and maybe you can confirm that.
Yeah, I think I'm not the most technical thing on the specific filtering and monitoring kind of outside of AI, but it's something we can take that back to our colleagues. We work really closely with our colleagues who work on the standards for filtering and monitoring for DfE. And they're obviously also in contact with those filtering and monitoring providers. We have committed to consult on a certification scheme for filtering and monitoring. So that's definitely something that we'll be looking at and making sure that those providers who are saying that they can, or making sure that filtering providers can provide an appropriate service for AI tools.
Thank you. Next question. How will US and international Gen AI services outside of the UK legislation be expected to meet these standards?
Yeah, Rob, do you want to go, or I'm happy to take it?
You kick off, and I'll add anything.
Sure. So I think what we're not saying, you know, this is the law for every product ever anywhere. What we're saying is this is what we expect for use in schools in England. But those big tech companies are really interested in working in England, and so anyone who's marketing, and you know, we have a lot of interest from tech companies, ed tech companies, whether they're based in the US or the UK or elsewhere. So I'm pretty confident that those companies, wherever they're based, are really keen on working on this. I think it's worth saying as well that this isn't just something that is happening in the UK. Whilst there might not be specific product safety standards exactly like this around the world, there's definitely a move towards these kinds of considerations. And for example, I think we see from both OpenAI and Google recently releasing functionalities within their kind of wider products that move towards these kinds of safeguards. So I think we can see this as part of a kind of global, a wider trend to protect children in AI, rather than just being a very niche AI education thing in England.
Okay. Next question. Given the importance of filtering, which is now really mandatory, will schools be granted ring-fenced funding? This guidance means that third-party products are no longer optional for safeguarding.
I think just to clarify on this one, I think we're not saying you must have. Well, I think the third-party products for filtering is kind of a separate thing. So I think what we're saying here is actually don't rely on your third party. It needs to be embedded. The requirement for schools to have appropriate filtering and monitoring has been around for a while. And there was a consultation on that, I think, last summer, and those requirements becoming mandatory. Again, I'm just going to say that's not directly in my policy area, so I can't give you the specific answer there. But I think everyone agrees that it's very important, and that children are kept safe. And I think the response to the consultation may have addressed some of the kind of barriers, including financial barriers, but I can't offer an answer on that specifically personally.
Okay. Next question. Isn't there a disconnect between what the DfE is advising and the tools that are actually out there in schools and being used? Some of the guidance feels more idealistic as opposed to what the vendor of the AI tool actually provides. Isn't there a risk that this will simply deter schools from using AI in schools? And is there any collaborative work going on where the DfE is speaking to vendors directly to ensure that tools marketed to education actually meet this guidance? You already answered that last part.
Start on this one. I think it's kind of I'd kind of relate to a fair bit of this. There is an element here which is about pushing the developers of AI for education to meet a high standard. That standard has kind of been moving as we find out about the risks that AI can present, and we're making sure that the AI developers for education are moving in a direction that we think is a safe one. I think a few years ago, there's a kind of direction of travel from a few years ago where those products definitely were not safe for children, and we're trying to move the market here. That said, there are tools out there which we know met previous versions of the standards and are working to meet the current standards. And we're definitely not trying to deter schools from using AI. As Faye said, there's a distinction between the tools which might be teacher facing and which don't have such a high bar, and those which are pupil facing and will have a higher bar. But we're having conversations all the time with those major developers and also the kind of smaller ed techs about how to meet the guidance and what it means for them. Anything you want to, I suppose, sorry, actually, I can see there's one comment underneath about whether or not any tool exists, which has built-in filtering and monitoring. I'd separate out the two bits there. There's definitely lots of tools that are marketed for use in education or marketed for use by children, which have that in-product filtering that we were talking about, which is making sure that they're not saying harmful things or inappropriate things, especially to underage users. The new standards that we have around monitoring, for example, rates of cognitive offloading, which might be one kind of particularly aspirational standard, is something that we're setting and working with developers of AI to be able to ensure. Faye, anything you want to add on that?
Yeah, I'd just add in terms of kind of work to make sure that tools are meeting standards. We had we launched on Friday the AI tutoring tools work, which is currently out asking for kind of expressions of interest to participate in co-designing and building AI tutoring tools, and those will be required to meet those standards. So as well as the kind of ongoing engagement with developers, we're kind of working on specific projects as well to make appropriate tools as well.
Excellent. Next question. Regarding copyright and intellectual property, are you therefore advising staff not to use free tools such as ChatGPT, even when preparing lessons and resources?
So as a starting place, I'd really recommend people having a look at the support materials that the departments publish, both for teachers and for school leaders, on how to set policies and govern the use of AI in your setting, because it speaks to this a fair bit. But in short, I would say those freely available online tools which don't make guarantees about keeping information secure and not using that for further AI development, in those kinds of tools, you shouldn't be inputting pupil work, anything which could be classified as copyright. Other tools which do make those guarantees, of course, it's okay to use that kind of information. Similarly, there's a question I've seen in the chat about whether or not kind of schools which are tied into the Google ecosystem should use Gemini, or schools which are tied into a Microsoft ecosystem should use Copilot. Without kind of speaking to every particular scenario, and it's worth looking at your own arrangements. If you have a license with Microsoft which includes Copilot, that's likely to include that kind of enterprise secure version of Copilot. Whereas, if you were there in that school to go onto the freely available version of Gemini Online, which isn't part of your school's kind of computer solution, then that might not be the might not be the version which you would put copyrighted information into. So generally speaking, it's the case that the kind of paid for solutions you're already working with will be where you have kind of secure enterprise versions.
Thank you. How should schools think about larger general purpose platforms like Microsoft Copilot, which aren't traditional edtech suppliers, particularly in relation to cognitive development and avoiding learner de-skilling?
Yeah, I think Copilot doesn't have a version which is a kind of AI tutoring tool for children. So in that instance, I'm not sure in what scenario you'd be kind of putting a child down in front of it. So the standard around cognitive offloading is based around the use cases which are child facing, and especially the use cases which are around kind of more back and forth conversational, maybe tutoring or kind of personalized learning interactions. So I'm not sure. I think that answers the question. I'm not sure.
I think it's basically the kind of problem that we're trying to solve, right? Because if every child had constant access to Copilot all the time, and they're doing their work entirely through Copilot, then that's when you are going to see that kind of de-skilling. So I think it's treat with great care, really, and make sure that that learning isn't being offloaded to AI tools.
Thank you. Next question. Will there actually be any consequences to schools not meeting the standards? We're still seeing vast numbers of schools using LLMs such as ChatGPT, despite the CEO of OpenAI making very concerning claims about adult content and also political stances within the current US administration, in addition to the fact that there isn't a version currently safe for schools in the UK from a data protection perspective?
So I think I would say generally, like, the law doesn't stop being the law because it's AI. So in many of the cases, you know, particularly around safeguarding, around data protection, schools still have their legal requirements to ensure that they're meeting data protection legislation and to make sure that they are meeting their safeguarding legislation. So whether it's it's OpenAI or another kind of data, OpenAI or ChatGPT or any other kind of tool or another kind of data breach, schools are would be still liable for any consequences of data breaches, and schools would be responsible for any safeguarding harms that their children came to. I think that, you know, that's one side, which is very much the kind of legal requirements. It's the kind of certification, if we were going to go down that route. I think that's a really open question. So the thing, you know, what does it look like, and you know, would it be mandatory? And I think if we were going to go down the consulting on that route, that would be something that we'd be really keen to hear from schools and colleges about how they think that should be enforced or not.
Thank you. Next question, hopefully a quick one. Can you share the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Okay, if you email it me
Happy
afterwards,
to.
I'll get it shared on our portal. Next proper question. Given that pupils are already using powerful, unfiltered AI tools at home, how does the DfE envisage schools balancing the cognitive development standards with the reality that AI use can't be contained to the school environment? Is there a role for parent-facing guidance to support consistency?
Do you want me to take this one? So I think it's worth noting that there's a consultation open at the moment about children's use of social media, which DCIT and DfE are running together. And that includes children's use of AI chatbots, as well as children's use of social media. So I think the kind of the risks to children from AI chatbots outside of school is definitely being considered as well. I think there is work underway thinking about how we support parents with technology. So I don't have all the facts to hand at the moment, but definitely it's definitely being considered in the wider in the round, and joining up as much as possible.
So we'll move on to the next one. Presumably, these guidelines are for child-centric use of AI in schools, and back office staff will be able to use tools suitable for their jobs, providing GDPR and suitability are met.
That's a fair question. And to go back to the standards themselves, each of them say whether or not they're just for child-facing, pupil-facing AI tools, or whether or not they're for pupil and kind of teacher or back office facing AI tools. But pretty much, as you've said, those ones which are just or for teacher facing tools as well, are focusing on those core requirements around GDPR, as opposed to the update on cognitive offloading and social emotional development and so on.
Excellent. Last question at the moment, unless that other one gets rephrased. Is there an AI guide for parents available from the DfE?
I don't think specifically AI, but I think there is technology. There is a kind of campaign around technology use. But again, I'd say that was, I think it's DCIT running that rather than the Department for Education, obviously with the wider remit.
Excellent. I think we're at the end of the questions then. So we'll call it a day there. Thank you very much, Faye and Rob, for your time today and for facing all these questions. If you can ping me the presentation, I'll share it on our portal so that all members will be able to access that. And yes, thank you. Thank you to everyone for attending as well. The feedback survey is live on our portal now, so if you can share as much information as you can on that, that would be really helpful. There's a chance to add any other questions that haven't been addressed, which I'll fire off to the experts at the DfE. But yeah, thank you everyone. It's been a great webinar. It's been really insightful. I hope you enjoyed it and got a lot out of it as well. And I hope for Rob and Faye that the questions have been quite insightful for how things are actually working on the ground floor. So thank you everyone.
Thanks so much for having us. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Cheers. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.